Occult Features of Anarchism is a 2019 work of political theory by the Canadian author Lagalisse. Lagalisse is a research fellow at the LSE International Inequalities Institute. Occult Features of Anarchism was our first book and comes with a foreword by the distinguished feminist author Barbara Ehrenreich. It begins with a slice of context-providing autobiography. In 2006, Lagalisse joined a Quebecoisian group affiliated to an organization of Mexican anarchists called the Zapatistas, established over a decade earlier in an attempt to challenge the North American Free Trade Agreement. The other members of the group were mostly Mexican, and one night one of them propounded a theory about international capitalism that included the Knights Templar, the Freemasons, magic, and a worldwide conspiracy of Jews. Understandably, Lagalisse was horrified, but rather than cut all ties, she argued them out of their anti-Semitism. Nevertheless, she remained shaken. That could have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. The Canadian group organized a tour for selected Zapatistas in North America. A woman named Magdalena tried to recount her experiences as a community health worker, but she brought in religious perspectives, persuading many of the westernized anarchists that she did not have what they called an analysis. Lagalisse profoundly disagreed, concluding that the disqualification of religion from the modern left and its rejection of feminization were one and the same. The experience persuaded her to write a paper on the subject. She tells us that the readers of that paper, academics and activists, were happy to admit that we must pay more attention to gender and that we must be more respectful of Indigenous identity. She insists that not only does that completely miss the point, but it's also patronizing. She reiterates the central assertion of her original paper, that in the context of the colonial encounter, Christianity granted other communities and traditions the name it had only ever given itself, religion, and reincarnated itself as secular. To put it another way, and again in her own words, to refrain from telling the non-atheist activists they are wrong while continuing to think they are, simply because he or she is a person of colour, is altogether different from deconstructing one's colonial mentality, which treats the religious as other in the first place. She follows both insights with a well-researched account of how anarchism actually emerged from occult movements that sprang up in the Renaissance and which endured until they were overtaken by materialism in the early 20th century. Freemasonry and the Illuminati, the real movements originating in the 18th century, and the anarchists share common roots, and contemporary anarchism's putative secular allegiance plays into the hands of the very system it aims to overturn. Part of her thesis is that materialism now rules mainstream academic/leftist discourse, and that any significant departure from it is ruled offside and thus marginalizable. What does it mean, she asks, that anarchist historians easily recognize selected religious movements as anarchist when they're safely located in the past as precursors, yet as soon as modern anarchism proper is articulated, religious leveling movements are seen as backward, if not heretical, to anarchism itself? The final chapter in the book, The Conspiracy of Kings Attending to the Conspiracy Theory Phenomenon, is an outline of research Lagalisse hopes to do in the future. The questions it raises are profound and original. She looks critically at the notions of cultural appropriation, conspiratism, and intersectionality, and each time she draws tentative conclusions that don't fit the rather boring, conventional, radical narrative. Since the year 2000, we've seen the right advancing into a host of new territories, particularly social class. By contrast, the left has been diversifying without necessarily advancing in areas such as identity, race, and feminism, whilst arguably deprioritizing its focus on the least privileged class. Lagalisse wants to issue a warning: if the left can't meet the right on its own territory, the right will win. In summary, this is a highly original work full of important, sometimes even groundbreaking insights. If you're at all interested in anarchism, and especially where it, and even hopefully the world, might be heading, you should consider this an indispensable addition to your reading list.